Hello and welcome to Radical Engagements here at Varnblog, and we're going to finish our reading of on Read on Authority by Judge Sabo. We just have the conclusion, and then I'm going to give my conclusion thoughts as well. So let's get to it. Anarchism is not based on a rhetorical trick, as if it were reacting to a mere word. Anarchism is not reflectively condemning something merely because they have been told that this or that act is authoritarian. Anarchists, in describing their position as an opposition to all authority, are summarizing a more complex and nuanced position. On one hand, it expresses their opposition and critique of modern society and the various forms of oppression that are characteristic to it. On the other hand, it also indicates a method of organizing they believe is most effective in combating it, looking to achieve a society of friends based on equal freedom for all, united in solidarity. I have a lot of critiques of anarchism that I haven't gone into, although some have come up. One, I do think the charge of moralism is fair. It's also fair against Marxists, and Marxists have an instinctive reaction not to admit it. I do think that preemptive violence, even presumed defensively, is actually a type of coercion, and as coercion, it would be a type of authority as defined by anarchists. I think there's a lot of hair splitting on that element of the argument, although Engels misrepresents what anarchists think in his argument around it, so that's not really relevant either. Anyway, from the beginning, anarchists have carefully and materially distinguished and contrasted authority from free agreement and called for revolution, fully expecting violence to be involved in this conflict because of the inherently violent nature of the state and class society. These distinctions rather easily follow. The anarchists address Engels' main objection about the need of administrative tasks, such as scheduling, to make combined action possible, and the need to force within a revolution. If necessary, anarchists have quite capable of expressing this while adopting Marxist or other forms of authoritarian language. They generally choose not to do so precisely because it's less scientifically precise and rhetorically misleading. I'm not sure that scientific precision applies to any of these arguments, to be quite frank. Judge Sabo, I know you're listening. All of these fail to meet my criterion of a sound scientific argument. The complexity involved is not there, and often, despite the fact that some anarchists are aware of it, a lot of these debates are actually semantical debates. The problem is that Engels' semantical debate is logical fallacy at its base, and a pretty basic one. And it seems to be just a gotcha that actually does damages to Engels' own position. So on that, I agree with you. Instead of consistently presenting the movement for emancipation of working classes as an immense protest against authority, the position was not only semantic, but also led them to take materially distinct positions from state socialists and Marxists, such as their opposition to the seizure of state power. So this is where there's a strong disagreement, and it's one where I think the anarchists are right about some of the Marxist positions in regards to things like the dictatorship of the proletariat, the rule of the party, etc., which end up reinforcing class codes, which Marx has built all kinds of theoretical frameworks to avoid, although Marx and Engels actually don't do that. That's a later development. And you get some very conservative arguments, actually, about developmentalism and all that, which could easily be applied against Marxists, made by Marxists against, particularly Marxists and Leninists, against both left communists and also anarchists. So, there's a problem here. Although I am still somewhat sympathetic to the fact that you do need to actually deal with the class coalitions that led to the state formation first before dealing with the state. I realize the state and capital have a much more intertwined relationship than classical Marxism tended to emphasize, from the standpoint of currency through the standpoint of the creation and maintenance and paying for markets. Markets are often seen as not having a cost in Marxism, and they clearly do. And a lot of the anarchist critiques that land against Marxists do run up against their own problems, like dictatorship of the deed really is anti-democratic, and it is a form of coercion, and it's a particularly sloppy form of coercion. And if anything, it's the chaos that was seen around that strategy in specific that led a lot of people to reject anarchism. Both Mancoist and the SRs, which had significant, the social revolutionaries, which had significant support in Russia, killed a lot of other leftists. Now, what happened to them on scale, particularly during the Russian Civil War and the first Red Terror, is not justified. I mean, was far beyond the scale of the killings, but the propaganda by the deed is what prompted the whole degeneration. So again, Engels doesn't make these arguments. In fact, he makes another argument in the opposite direction. It doesn't make any sense. I think a lot of anarchists today avoid looking at what the SRs and Mancovists totally did during the Civil War, and during the lead up to the Red Terror from 1919 to 1921, by rightly pointing out what the Bolsheviks did during the Red Terror, which was to often terrorize the peasants that they had previously told they empowered, and only Bakunin's mild market reforms were able to starve some of that off. And when those were reversed, decolonization kicked in, and thus the attack on the peasants began again. But nonetheless, let's get back here. Engels did not seriously engage with anarchist theory as it actually existed. Although, no, he didn't. Although Proudhonian anarchism or mutualism was far more established than the anarcho-collectivist / proto-anarcho-communist at the time that he was writing. But he didn't engage Bakunin in good faith. I will agree with that. Instead, he took a slogan, the opposition to the principle of authority, and then imposed his own upon it. Instead of seeing what positions they held, he deduced what positions he believed they should hold based on this reading. I think that's fair. He did do that. And when he discovered the positions they actually held were different from what he believed they should hold, he blamed them rather than recognizing his error. On authority is not isolated incident in this regard, and a more full history of the conflict between the anarchists and the Marxists within the First International. I'm betting he's going to sign the first socialist schism as a. Yep. I would say that my only criticism of that is don't over rely on one source. That said, I still think that whole split was avoidable. The reliance on authority for the past 150 years is illustrative of how anarchist theory came to be ignored or misrepresented of being confronted on their own instead of being confronted on their own terms. Well, I don't actually think on authority is actually that important of a text. It's been resurrected recently in anarchist debates. What is especially troubling about these critiques is that they often do so require Marxists to abandon their own position, rejecting class analysis as moralizing or undercutting their own emancipatory vision of socialism. Yep, that I agree with. That's why I'm not fond of that text. A real Marxist critique of anarchism can't merely quibble with definition of terms. Nope, it cannot, but must strike at the real position, as well as the theory of practice that underlines it, which requires seriously engaging with its theoretical content. What the problem is, on this, Judge Sabo, I'm going to push back a little bit. Anarchist theory after the 1920s is all over the place. Like, it's fairly consistent what the Proudhonists believe, the anarcho-collectivists and the anarcho-communists believe before the 1820s and 30s. I mean, before the 1920s and 30s. But after the Spanish Civil War, things get really weird. And I mean, this leads to inner anarchist debates to no end, and there's less of a theoretical framework on which to found, say, anarchist economics, etc. Most of the anarchists who have done that have largely relied on Marxism, although a few really run from that, rely on some other things like MMT, which and neo-chartalism, which I've never really understood because neo-chartalism is explicitly a statist form of views of the existence of money. One that I think is actually probably more sympathetically addressed by the people who view money as a creature of law and the establishments of markets around law. But nonetheless, in this regard, on authority fails in nearly every liberal. Agreed. It fails not only to seriously challenge any anarchist position, but even fails the Marxists themselves by misreading their own theory. Yeah, I mean, it's just I wouldn't say misreading it; it just ignores it to win a cheap to make a cheap dig. Which should tell you don't base your theoretical commitments off of a fight you're having at any given time. All right, like and subscribe. We're done with this one. This was a short one. The last one was an hour, so this little capstone is a break. And we have some small text coming up. We have our Bodega series coming up on radical engagements, and we have militancy, the highest form of alienation, coming up as well. So those are some of the texts. There'll be some small text for a little while because I need a break from these long ones. You need a break from these long ones. I've noticed with the longer series, there's a whole lot of people who fall off. So we'll come back. Like and subscribe. Hit the bell. We have a Patreon. You can find us there. There's multiple tiers. You can get access to audio for almost everything for as low as $3 a month. I don't monetize this channel. So if you don't want to support the Patreon, I would love for you to comment or share. Thank you and have a great day. We'll be coming back to another Judge Sabo piece, probably in the middle of the year. But hopefully it won't be another 15-parter of like almost 9.5 hours or so. All right. Take care.